Hey everybody, Jamie here. Today I want to talk about version control. This is an essential skill for people working in DevOps. If you're coming from an operations background, this may be new concept for you. But if you're coming from a developer role, I hope you have been exposed to this concept. The first, what I want to do is talk about a Docker workshop being offered by cloudskills.io. It's a 2-day virtual workshop. I'm going to post a link up here if I can figure out how to use YouTube to do that. And this workshop is a great opportunity for you to get up to speed with Docker, which is also an essential skill in DevOps. At least today it is. And virtual workshops, I think, are a great opportunity to be able to get to interact with live people instead of just watching courses and having questions and not being able to get feedback and answers right away, or getting to get that human connection. And so I would encourage you to go check it out and decide if it's something that you would like to do. I know for me, being in East Tennessee and in Knoxville, it's hard to get in-person training sometimes, and virtual courses are a great way to do that. So I'm going to put a link to that in the description also. So please check that out if it's something that you want to do or you think it's going to be helpful for you. I think it'll go a long way at getting you up to speed on how to use Docker if you're new to it, or if you really haven't worked with it quite a bit. So back to version control. Version control, also sometimes called source control, are typically used by developers to track changes to their code base. So as a developer makes changes to code, those changes are tracked, and then you can commit or save a change set to this database or repository that keeps track of all the changes over time that have happened to your code. The reason this is critical for DevOps is because it's hard to automate something if you're not keeping track of changes to it, how the changes are they good changes. So when you're talking about version control, you really get a lot of capability to audit. So you can see who made changes and what changes they made and when they made those changes, which is really advantageous in a PCI or a SOX environment or HIPAA, any type of environment that's highly regulated, and you need to know who made changes to the infrastructure. Hopefully you're storing that as source code in version control, right? Any scripts that you run on a regular basis, it's great to be able to version those, because then you can keep track of changes that have been made and when they were made, or even detect when changes were made but nobody committed those changes into source control or version control. So that way you can kind of know more about what's going on in your environment than you did before. Version control typically comes in two flavors: centralized version control, which is really not used much anymore, it's still out there, or a distributed version control, which Git, which I think most people have heard of by now, is a distributed version control system. Git, typically people interact with that at the command line, but there's also graphical tools. And graphical tools for Git, I think, are really powerful, as it allows you to visualize what changes you're making, how many files that you edited, a little bit easier. So what I typically like to do is, when I'm editing code, I just go and make all the edits that I want. And then I'll open up a tool like GitKraken, which I'll also put a link to up here and down in the description, to visualize all of my changes. So I can look at my changes. Say I edited 3 or 4 Terraform files because I'm making some infrastructure changes, and they're not really grouped together in any logical way. So what I can do is with a visual tool, I can go through and pick all the changes that needs to be a logical commit. So for me, a logical commit is when I group things together that should be together. So if I had to make an edit across 2 files to make one change, then I would go back, pick out those changes using a tool like GitKraken, and make that a single commit. Then I would go through and grab the other pieces of changes that I made and I would group those together if they could be. If they can't be grouped together and they're independent, then I'll typically make them their own commit. I do that so I can track how my commits are working and to keep it logical. So if somebody's reading my commit history, they should see a story of how I made the changes and what changes that I made. I think that's important for me and my workflow. It may not be important for you and your workflow. That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself. But that's a tip that I'm going to give you, is trying to keep your commits contained to things that need to change together. And a visual tool will allow you to just go ahead and make all the edits that you want to make, and then you can go break them out later. At least I find that easier to do. Version control also gives you the ability to start using continuous integration, which for infrastructure as code sounds kind of weird, but if you think about tools like Terraform or Pulumi, Terraform can have the syntax checked and it can make sure that you're formatting your code correctly. So in an integration, continuous integration environment, you can run those steps on check-in to make sure that your code's being formatted, that you didn't introduce any invalid syntax or miss a parenthesis or a square bracket or a curly brace. So you can do that things with integration with version control. You could also, for like things like Pulumi that it's actually written in just code, you can run things like any linters that you normally would run for your code. If you're doing JavaScript, you can do that. I'm pretty sure there's TypeScript support now, so you can even do syntax checking with the TypeScript tools. So version control opens up a world of the continuous integration, continuous delivery environment that you wouldn't have if you're not storing your scripts or your infrastructure as code in version control. There's lots of advantages to version control, like automatically generating release notes so it can go gather all of your commit messages and generate from the last time that you did a deployment till the next time you do a deployment. You can group all those things up to keep track of work that you're working on. A lot of tools like Azure DevOps, Jira offer integration with tickets and with your commits. So GitHub does this too. So you can put a ticket number in your commit message or even in the title of your commit, like the first line, and it'll link those together. So now you can not only trace what changes you made to your source code or to your infrastructure, but you can also have that traceability back to what work item triggered that work, which from an operations perspective, I think is really valuable, because somebody submits a bug or an infrastructure change, or maybe you got a audit request come in and you need to make some changes to get into compliance with some new standards. If you're tracking those work items, being able to link those back to the source code or the actual code changes that bring you into compliance gives you a timestamp and a date, who did it, and it also can link back to, if you're doing automated deployments through a continuous integration, continuous delivery service, it'll even link back to what build and when that was released and who released it. So there's a lot of power in using version control if you want to leverage it for being the driver of a lot of your processes, which is what I really like to do. If it isn't in version control, in my book, it doesn't really exist. And I think that getting into a DevOps mindset and thinking about that, I think that's one of the key tools that you really need to pick up. So I'm going to put some links down in the description to a few books that I think on Git that I think are helpful, that I reference or that I use. I also put some links to some other resources online. There's plenty of courses out there on Pluralsight or Linux Academy, and I'll put some links to those too. If you have any questions, want to talk to me about Git, I'm happy to answer those. Please leave some comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you like what I'm doing. Also, I know I'm still probably feeling a lot nervous and I'm not getting a lot of feedback. So if you could, Give me negative and positive feedback in the comments. Hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, and let me know what you think what I'm doing and what topics you'd like for me to cover. I'm also going to start doing some, and I've been saying this the last few videos, start doing some videos of recording me working with Get Kraken and kind of what my workflow there is and how to do certain features. And I'm also going to start trying to work in some Terraform and hopefully some Pulumi training. That's going to be a new one for me, but I think that'll be important to have some like quick getting started guides and share some of my experience. So if there's anything specific that you'd like to see or want to know, please post it down in the comments and just let me know. Or you can send me a DM on Twitter if you want to keep it private. And then I'll try to address any questions that you have or any feedback. Thanks for tuning in. Like I said again, please subscribe. And thanks.